Thousands of years ago, ancient Egyptians had a very different idea about what happened after death. To them, death was not simply the end of a person's existence. They believed that part of a person could continue living in another world. But this belief created an important problem. What would happen to a person's body after death? The Egyptians believed the body needed to remain connected to the person who had died. This belief eventually led to one of the most famous practices of ancient Egypt. They began preserving the dead as mummies. But why did they go to such incredible lengths? Why spend so much time preserving a body that could no longer move? The answer begins with the Egyptian idea of the afterlife. Ancient Egyptians imagined the afterlife as a place where people could continue their existence. They believed the dead could eat, drink, work, and enjoy their new life. But entering this new life was not considered automatic. The dead person needed to be properly prepared, and the body was an important part of that preparation. Egyptians believed a person was made up of several spiritual elements. One of these was called the Ka. The Ka was connected to a person's life force. Another spiritual element was called the Ba. The Ba was often represented as a human-headed bird. Egyptians believed the Ba could move between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But these spiritual elements still needed a connection to the person's body. This made preserving the body extremely important. If the body disappeared completely, that connection could be threatened. So Egyptians developed ways to prevent the body from rapidly decaying. Their solution became the process we now call mummification. Mummification was not invented overnight. It developed gradually over thousands of years. Some of the earliest Egyptian burials already showed signs of natural preservation. The dry desert sand could remove moisture from a buried body. Without much moisture, bacteria had a harder time breaking the body down. Ancient Egyptians eventually noticed this natural effect. They began experimenting with ways to preserve bodies deliberately. Over time, their methods became increasingly sophisticated. By the height of ancient Egyptian civilization, mummification had become a highly organized process. The first major challenge was removing moisture from the body. Egyptian embalmers used a naturally occurring salt mixture called natron. Natron could absorb moisture from tissues. This helped slow down the natural process of decay. The body was carefully treated with natron for an extended period. The exact process could vary depending on the period and the person's wealth. Wealthier families could afford much more elaborate preparation. Poorer people generally received simpler treatment. This meant that not every Egyptian mummy looked exactly the same. The most elaborate mummification was usually reserved for people with greater wealth and status. Pharaohs received some of the most elaborate funerary preparations. Their tombs were designed to protect their bodies and possessions. But preserving the body was only one part of the entire burial tradition. Egyptians also believed the dead would need useful objects in the afterlife. This is why tombs could contain food. Some tombs contained containers filled with offerings. Others contained clothing and personal belongings. Wealthy tombs could contain furniture and other valuable objects. Egyptians were essentially preparing a household for eternity. But they also believed the dead needed protection. This is where Egyptian gods became important. Different gods were associated with different parts of death and the afterlife. One of the most famous was Anubis. Anubis was associated with mummification and the protection of the dead. He was commonly represented with the head of a jackal. Jackals were often seen around ancient Egyptian cemeteries. Their presence may have helped inspire the imagery surrounding Anubis. Another important god was Osiris. Osiris was strongly connected with death, resurrection, and the afterlife. Egyptians believed Osiris ruled over the realm of the dead. The story of Osiris became closely connected with Egyptian ideas about resurrection. According to the myth, Osiris himself was killed and later restored. His story became a powerful symbol of life continuing after death. This helped strengthen the religious importance of preserving the dead. But the Egyptians did not simply preserve bodies and leave them in a tomb. They created elaborate rituals surrounding the dead. Priests performed ceremonies intended to help the deceased enter the afterlife. One famous ritual was called the opening of the mouth ceremony. The ritual symbolically restored the deceased person's ability to see, hear, breathe, and eat. This ceremony shows how seriously Egyptians treated the transition into the next world. The mummy was therefore more than a preserved corpse. It was part of a much larger religious system. The tomb itself was also part of this system. Egyptians designed tombs as protected spaces for the dead. Some tombs were small and simple. Others were enormous monuments that took years to construct. The pyramids are the most famous examples of monumental Egyptian tombs. But pyramids were not originally designed simply as giant monuments. They were built as royal funerary complexes. The Great Pyramid was built as the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu. Inside and around these complexes were spaces connected with funerary rituals. The Egyptians wanted the deceased ruler to have everything necessary for the afterlife. This included food offerings, it included religious ceremonies, it included protective symbols and objects, and most importantly, it included the preserved body. But there was another important reason for protecting the mummy. Egyptians feared that the body could be damaged or disturbed. Tombs therefore needed protection from thieves. Grave robbers were a serious problem in ancient Egypt. Valuable objects inside tombs made them attractive targets. This is one reason Egyptian tombs often contained hidden chambers and protective designs. Unfortunately, many ancient tombs were eventually robbed. Some mummies were even moved or hidden by later Egyptians to protect them. Archaeologists have discovered royal mummies that had been reburied in hidden locations. These discoveries show how important the preservation of the dead remained. But mummification was not only for kings. Ordinary Egyptians could also be mummified. The quality of the process depended heavily on wealth. A wealthy person could afford skilled embalmers and expensive materials. A poorer person might receive a much simpler burial. The differences could be seen in the preparation of the body. They could also be seen in the quality of the coffin. They could even be seen in the number of objects placed inside the tomb. Some mummies were wrapped in many layers of linen. Linen was carefully placed around the body. Amulets could be positioned between layers of wrapping. These small objects were believed to provide supernatural protection. Different amulets could have different meanings. One famous symbol was the scarab. The scarab was associated with ideas of renewal and rebirth. Another important symbol was the Eye of Horus. It was associated with protection and restoration. These symbols turned the mummy into more than a wrapped body. The wrappings themselves could also carry religious meaning. Priests could recite prayers while the body was being prepared. The entire process connected physical preservation with spiritual protection. But how exactly did embalmers preserve the body? The process could begin soon after death. The body was cleaned and prepared for embalming. The embalmers then focused on removing moisture. The body could be covered with natron. Natron gradually drew water out of the tissues. This drying process was essential for long-term preservation. Embalmers also treated the body carefully to improve its appearance. The body was then wrapped in linen. Layer after layer of linen could be added. The embalmers sometimes placed protective objects between the layers. Finally, the mummy could be placed inside one or more coffins. Wealthy individuals could have several layers of protection. A mummy might be placed inside an inner coffin. That coffin could then be placed inside another coffin. Some royal burials included elaborate stone sarcophagi. The goal was to create a protected resting place for eternity. Yet preserving the body was not perfect. Even carefully prepared mummies could deteriorate over thousands of years. Moisture was one of the greatest enemies of preservation. Heat and humidity could also damage ancient remains. Insects and microorganisms could cause further deterioration. Tomb damage could expose the mummy to the outside environment. Grave robbers could destroy or remove parts of a burial. Despite these dangers, many Egyptian mummies survived for thousands of years. Their survival allows us to study ancient Egyptian society today. Scientists can examine mummies to learn about people's lives. Their remains can reveal information about age. They can also provide clues about diet. Scientists can sometimes identify evidence of injuries or disease. Teeth can reveal what people ate and how they lived. Bones can reveal patterns of physical activity. Hair and other preserved materials can provide additional clues. Even the materials used in the burial can tell archaeologists about social status. This means mummies are valuable historical evidence. They are not simply mysterious objects from ancient tombs. They are physical remains of real people who lived thousands of years ago. Some mummies belong to powerful rulers. Others belong to ordinary men and women. Some belong to children. Some belong to people whose names have been completely forgotten. Every mummy represents an individual human life. This is one reason archaeologists treat ancient human remains with care. The Egyptians themselves also believed the dead deserved respect. Their entire funerary system was built around preserving memory. A person's name was extremely important. Egyptians believed that remembering and speaking someone's name could help keep their memory alive. Tomb inscriptions, therefore, often included names and titles. Statues could also represent the deceased. Pictures showed scenes from daily life. These images could include farming. They could show fishing. They could show people preparing food. They could even show musicians and celebrations. The tomb was designed to represent a continuing existence. In this way, Egyptian tombs became windows into ancient life. But there was still one final challenge. The deceased had to be judged before entering the afterlife. Egyptians believed the heart played an important role in this judgment. In the famous weighing scene, the heart was placed on a scale. The heart was compared with the feather associated with Ma'at. Ma'at represented truth, order, and balance. A balanced heart meant the deceased had lived properly. This judgment was connected with the person's chance of entering the afterlife. So the mummy was only one part of a much larger journey. The body was preserved. The tomb was prepared. Offerings were provided. Religious rituals were performed. Protective symbols were placed around the deceased. And the person's spirit was prepared for the afterlife. All of these traditions came from the same fundamental belief. Ancient Egyptians believed that death was a transition rather than an absolute ending. They preserved the body because they believed the person still had a future beyond death. That belief transformed death into a journey that required preparation. And that is why ancient Egyptians made mummies. What looks like an obsession with preserving the dead was actually their way of preparing for eternity.